Welcome back to another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, and on this week's show I'm joined by the Chief Legal Officer for Müller UK, which is Sam Plant. Müller is a brand that we're all aware of, the B2C business, one of the UK's largest food brands and at the heart of most dairy products that we see on our shelves. But what sits behind that, and what I hadn't actually appreciated before Sam and I chatted, was that a really large portion of their business is made up of the supply chain and everything that goes into it and wider distribution, which is a B2B business. So some really interesting stuff. Sam shares 3 really powerful lessons, which I hope will resonate with a lot of listeners out there. Number 1, we covered why mistakes can be celebrated in the legal profession and aren't always the worst thing that can happen in your career. And we talk about a couple of experiences that Sam had earlier in his career and how he encourages his team to adopt this mindset. Number 2 is something that has hit home with Sam over the past few years and later in his career, and that's about saying no to opportunities and not expanding your role for the sake of expanding that, which is a little bit at odds with some of the other advice that's been dished out by people on the podcast. So interested to know your thoughts on that one. And number 3, we discuss why he's on a mission to do what he can to address and challenge the gender bias that sits within the legal profession and also the wider professions. I've been following Sam on LinkedIn for a number of years now, and I'm always really impressed by the content and the stuff that he shares on the platform. A lot of it is personal views on the gender imbalance and his position of privilege as a white male working within the legal profession. So it was great to hear about his motivations for doing that and how he feels that people working in the profession can go that step further and be brave and put their views and express those views. So if you've ever questioned where the line sits between caution and courage in your career, then this one's for you. So let's dive in. Hi Sam, welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law.
Thanks very much, Scott. Lovely to be here, wherever here is.
I know, both in white rooms. I'm in a bit of an echoey cupboard recording in a new office in Amsterdam. This is the room I've been assigned to, and it's echoey, I think. But it looks like I'm under the stairs. But thank you. Thanks for joining me. I've given a brief introduction as best I can, but it would be great if we could hear it from you. If you obviously this is a careers focused podcast, but if you could give us an overview of your current position and what that entails.
Yeah, sure. So I lead a legal and compliance team at the Müller group of companies in the UK. So Müller, hopefully a brand that you know and enjoy, Scott. Müller Corners, Müller Rice, all of that good stuff. Also including the Kalina group of businesses. So the bit of Müller that you perhaps don't know about is a sort of distribution and logistics piece of it. So we own brands like Eddie Stobart, Kalina, Farrow & Welsh, various sort of transportation brands as well. So it's sort of overseeing operations across all of those different businesses in the UK and Ireland. Okay, sort of cool. Supported by a rather fabulous team of young and much better lawyers than me.
Well, that's the way. Hire people better than you, right?
Absolutely.
How big's the team?
I always have to count them. I should know that number, really. I think we've got about 14, 15 of us, not all lawyers, although mainly lawyers, sort of covering all of those different businesses.
Yeah. And you're based, where is it you're based?
So I work out of Market Drayton. So there's a big old yogurt factory in the middle of Market Drayton in Shropshire, surrounded by nothing but fields and cows. So my drive to work is very nice. Do lots of fields. Most of us are based there. We've got a few other people sort of scattered across the UK, but we try and get together fairly regularly.
Cool. Nice. And how much of the I guess how much of the core business is the consumer facing stuff versus the other brands and the logistics and the supply chain that feed into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's essentially kind of three business units that operate within the UK that we support. So there's that whole kind of logistics piece, which is enormous. Kalina started off as a means of just moving chilled Müller products around the country, and over time has become something that is sort of bigger in scale actually than the food businesses, and is comprised of something like, again, I should know this number, but something like 16 different sort of business units, all doing slightly different things in that sort of logistics and transportation warehousing space. So that's a big part of what we do. Then you've got something called Müller Yoghurts and Desserts, MYD, which is the bit you're probably most familiar with, which is, as the name suggests, the yogurts and desserts, most of which is Müller branded stuff, but we also do some own brand stuff for various of the UK supermarkets. And then we've got something called Müller Milk and Ingredients, which is largely around the supply of milk, butter, cream into, again, largely into the supermarket. So if you go into your local Sainsbury's and you pick up your full pint of milk, the chances are that came from a Müller dairy. You know, we're one of probably two really big companies that service a lot of the grocers when it comes to their sort of dairy offering to consumers. And the work's kind of spread relatively evenly across those three different business units, and sort of keeps life interesting because you've got a number of sort of different things going on within those, and although there's some things that connect them, they're all quite different. So it's almost like supporting three different businesses.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you've got to wonder: is a lunchbox, is a packed lunchbox complete without a Müller product in there? A crunch corner or something. I always remember getting one of those in my school years.
Yeah, we need to get you involved in our marketing team, Scott, because you're absolutely right. You do have to wonder how anyone could make it through the day without their Müller product. One of the sort of Müller ambitions is to put a Müller product in every fridge. And I think, and this is where I'll probably get shot by a marketing person, but I think we're in over 50% of UK fridges, but the aspiration is to actually have a product in every one. And I'm sure there's a lot of products in yours, and you've been doing your preparation for this podcast by tasting as many of our products as possible.
Yeah, I'll do a sponsored LinkedIn post. Send me the merch. My kids love it. What's your favorite product? If I was to have a gun to your head.
Yeah, I'm a sort of corner guy, really. Yeah. I don't know what my absolute favorite would be. We brought back some sort of good retro ones recently. Sort of Mississippi Mud is very good. I can recommend that.
Oh yeah, nice.
But yeah, Müller corners have been a staple for our family for years and years. So yeah, it's nice actually to join a business and get to sort of sample products that have been part of your life for quite a long while.
Yeah, nice to see it happening. Good. Well, thanks for that. We'll dive into what came before Müller as we go through our conversation. But we're here for the lessons. So if we jump in, if you could share lesson number 1 with me, please.
Yeah, and that is around the fact that sort of there's a magnificence around mistakes, and I think it's a bit trite, isn't it? I think it's pretty much trotted out by everyone that you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes, and that is absolutely It's absolutely true. There's a reason why people say that a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I suppose I've learned over time, I think there's something about lawyers, Scott. I don't know if this is borne out by the lawyers you talk to. I think a lot of us kind of measure our success, measure our careers by reference to the mistakes that we don't make. And there's I think people sort of perceive lawyers. I don't quite know where this comes from. We probably create this a little bit, but they perceive lawyers as being very kind of wise and knowing everything. And I certainly sit in meetings where people sort of assume that I know stuff simply because many years ago I did a law degree. And I think that does sometimes kind of feed through into a sort of fear on the part of lawyers of getting things wrong. And therefore people sort of, being very risk averse and absolutely one of those criticisms that you always hear about lawyers, along with it sort of, I don't know, them taking too long or whatever it is, or being too expensive, is that kind of lawyers tend to sort of sit in the fence, or they build in, so many different sort of caveats that actually advice can end up being not terribly helpful. And I think part of that is around this sort of this kind of fear of getting it wrong. But for me, I think there's mistakes are kind of to be celebrated, and obviously you don't want to spend it's not a smart career move to make too many mistakes, but and I try and avoid them. But I do think there is actually something to be said for making mistakes every now and then. And there's
I guess it's knowing the right ones to make before putting your hand up. But for me, I think as professional services, people, I guess, perception of like the layperson, they go to an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, for the answer, for the right answer. And that's generally, most lawyers enter the profession from a service provider, and the expectation would be that the answer is right. But there's, I think, within law, as people within the profession know, there maybe isn't a right. There's a lot of grey and not always black and white. But the expectation still exists. So the ability to make mistakes, I don't know if it's as I'm not sure if I'm putting it right, but I don't know what people's expectation is, that it is just a yes or a no answer, or but making commercial mistakes, I think, is different from making a legal mistake.
I think that's absolutely true. And in the same way that if I go and have a chat to an IT guy, I mean, I haven't got a clue about what I'm talking about, and I won't know. I have no sense really of the context or the stuff that's going through his head when I ask him questions. I think we take a lot of that for granted as people who work in the legal profession. And so, the expectation, I think, sometimes on the part of our customers, that it is, it's a black or white, isn't it? It's a yes or no. I think that's kind of understandable. They don't necessarily see all that kind of messy context that is behind. I think there's sort of the particular kind of issue for me, there's I was thinking about this the other day. There's a short story, which I think was written by Stephen King, and I read it a very long time ago. It's called something like The Long Walk or something like that.
Right.
And it's about this. This is vaguely relevant. I'll sort of get to the point, but it's this kind of vaguely dystopian future, and there's this kind of race where people walk, and they walk very, very long distances, and they have to keep their pace above a certain. They have to walk above a certain pace, otherwise, plot spoiler, they get shot.
Right.
So they're on this walk, and right at the very beginning, one of the competitors falls below the sort of required pace, and I think you've got two or three chances before they come up and they shoot you in the head.
Right.
and everyone else thinks, okay, this guy's going to be the first to go. He's not a very strong competitor. But actually, what you find out over the course of the story is he's actually one of the stronger ones. And what he does is, right at the very beginning, he figures out what the pace is. So he drops his pace to the point where he's going too slow. So he makes a mistake. But in doing that, he sort of figures out where that line is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with a lot of the things that we do, if you never make that mistake, you never kind of figure out where that line is, you're always leaving something on the table, aren't you? You're always kind of operating with a degree of comfort zone or caution that actually you don't need to factor in. So things like someone asked me to clear a marketing campaign. The temptation as a lawyer is to think, well, okay, where's my sort of comfort point, which is probably higher than most people's anyway, certainly higher than the marketing guys. And then maybe I factor in a little bit, because who wants to be embarrassed and find out that, their advice was a little bit aggressive. And so you build in that buffer, and you end up leaving, you kind of leave a lot of competitive advantage behind. Whereas if you get it wrong, and you pick your places, you don't want people to print 2 million labels and then find out that actually you were a little bit overconfident. But if it's it's an online campaign, something like that, actually making that mistake and figuring out the line, where that line is and the pace you can go at, that's brilliant. Whereas if you spend your whole career and you never make one of those mistakes, you could reach a grand old age like me and say, what a fantastic career I've had. I never made a mistake.
Yeah.
The reality is you probably made a mistake every time. The mistake being that you never took that risk, and that's I guess something I've kind of reflected on a little bit. That aversion to cocking it up, pardon my French, sometimes leads us, I think, to make a very different mistake, and that mistake being just to be overly cautious.
Yeah. Is there a time, or is there a mistake you can remember that was a tipping point for you, where you realised it wasn't such a big deal?
God, so many to choose from, Scott. No, I mean I can remember a few that were a bit more painful along the way, but I think it probably is in that kind of marketing space, actually. Of really just kind of reflecting on what felt like a really good track record of getting it right, and then thinking, well, okay, that probably suggests that I'm getting it wrong, and I'm just drawing my line in the wrong place. So I think one of the things I've always, well, since then at least, tried to encourage the people who work with me is, well, look, let's be conscious of the space we're operating in and the impact of a mistake, but let's not beat ourselves up if we make a mistake. And in fact, let's kind of celebrate that and say, okay, well, that has actually revealed something to us that wouldn't have been revealed if we'd got it, right, in inverted commas.
Yeah. And how do you encourage junior team members to embrace that attitude? How do you go about doing that when things are at stake, I guess, in real life?
I think a lot of it is around trust, isn't it? And say, God knows, I've made so many mistakes in my career, and I think, again, I'd be hugely suspicious of anyone in my team who never made a mistake, for all the reasons I've said. That just suggests that they're just being overly cautious. So I think it is just emphasizing that, look, if you do if you approach things sensibly, you think it through properly, there are times when you're going to get it right, and there are times when you're going to get it wrong, and you hope you get more of the former than you do of the latter. But if the thinking was right, then I don't think we can beat ourselves up over the results. And as long as we're kind of learning from those mistakes, so I think it's really just making sure your team know that you've got their back, And if something goes wrong, then you'll back that decision if it's made in the right way. And it's building up, I think, a bit of confidence and trust across the organization as a whole. And obviously you do that through having enough wins that you've got that kind of credibility. But I think trying to get away from that idea that lawyers are infallible and that actually we're going to make some sort of judgments, and like any judgment, you're going to get some of those, those wrong. And that is healthy and natural, and the sign of a legal team that is operating right on the edge, which is where we should be, rather than, sort of 50 yards back in a very sort of safe bunker.
I think is one of the big learnings for anyone that goes on to comment or makes that first move in house. Like, it's the first time where you're like properly aligned with your job is to align with the business's objectives, rather than just being the advice giver on this is the law and these are your options. Like, you should really be forming. I think good lawyers, or the people that succeed, really form a view, take an opinion, or at least try and push that forward. And that sort of goes into the commercial awareness, which is spoken about in every university interview cheat sheet or whatever. It means absolutely nothing sometimes, but I think that's kind of real life examples. Awesome. And do you think it varies massively from like the risk appetite or the people you see working in practice versus those that work in-house or client side?
The firms that we tend to work with, because because I personally and we as a team really value, our experts making those judgments and taking those risks. Sort of the firms we tend to work with, tend to operate in a very similar way to us, because it's not terribly helpful if, we're there sitting in front of the CEO who just wants to know, can I do it or not? Can I move it from here to there? And you've got a law firm who are telling you the 58 risks related to that, and then saying, good luck, Sam. So we tend to avoid those. And again, I think there's a big part of that which is around trust. So, obviously, if I work with a law firm and they fear that the minute they get it wrong, I'm not going to instruct them anymore, or I'm going to sue them, or God knows what, then that's when they'll be building in all of those different buffers and caveats. So I think in the same way that you kind of hope to create that environment of trust, that you're in this together, that risk absolutely is part of the equation, that you'll get things wrong from time to time. If you can create that same trust with your external advisors, then I think even the most kind of risk averse will feel a bit more inclined to, kind of express a view. And that's what we want, really. We want people to, whether it's in-house or externally, to not to tell us the law, because frankly, I'm not terribly interested in that. It's just to give us a view.
Yeah, you want to have the confidence that they know all that sits behind it, but it's not what you need. The decision or their advice is based on sound reasoning around that stuff, right? Cool. Well, we'll move on to lesson 2.
Can't remember what lesson 2 is. Oh yeah. So lesson 2.
These are just off the cuff. We're not. There's no prep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Right. Let me think about what lesson 2 might be, Scott. Oh yeah, I've got one. This may be just a bit of personal therapy, by the way. I don't know whether this is going to be how relevant this will be for everyone else. But lesson 2 for me, and this took me a long time to learn, an embarrassingly long time to learn, really, was just the learning how to stop saying yes to stuff And I don't mean, the CEO saying, "Oh, can we do this?" and me just saying, "Well, yes," because you're the CEO. So I think that ability to be able to say no in terms of the advice you give, I think if you don't learn that one pretty quickly, then sooner or later that's going to bite you in the backside. So it's not necessarily that; it's learning to say no to doing stuff, to actually taking on work. And again, I think this is. You tell me if you disagree, because you may deal with lots of lawyers who you think are really good at this, but I think a lot of people go into the law. One of the reasons they go into the law, and particularly why they go in-house, I think this is particularly true of in-house lawyers, is that kind of wish to sort things out. That kind of can-do spirit, that sort of helpful spirit. We're there to sort of serve and support. And I think, so that attracts, a particular type of person, of which I think I'm probably pretty typical. There's a bit of people pleasing about this, and a bit of a feeling that, okay, if you've got a legal function, you need to be justifying the existence of that legal function on a daily basis. And you put all of those things together, a bit of the kind of psychological makeup of lawyers, a bit of the sort of nature and a role of a legal function. And you end up in a position where I think, for many, many, many years, I found it very difficult. If someone said, "Listen, we've got it's not strictly speaking in your job spec, it's not strictly speaking kind of legal or compliance, but we'd really love you to do this, please." And for years and years and years, I just said yes. And so I've ended up running risk programs. I ended up running a CSR, sustainability program, both of which I really enjoyed, particularly the sustainability one. But no, I think probably in retrospect, both of them I should have absolutely said no to.
Interesting.
Because I guess the lesson for me is that nobody actually saying yes to stuff doesn't really get you very far. No one really appreciates the person who says yes if actually as a consequence they stretch themselves so thin that they're not able to do the job as well as they'd hope.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because a lot of the people we speak to, I think, want to expand the legal function or want it to involve new areas, or they want their remit to expand. I guess in order to elevate their position within a business internally. But perhaps how those opportunities come around maybe dictates how far advanced how far that advancement is. If it's something that, because I think a lot of the people who have taken on new functions where they've gone out and looked for it and grabbed it and said, "I'll take ownership of this," or "Let me take this problem off your plate," is slightly different from saying yes, where someone's identified the problem, looking to shift it off, and they've delegated it effectively, rather than someone's coming in and taking ownership of this issue that we didn't realize we had. It probably is interpreted slightly different within the business as well. But yeah, it's I guess it's splitting hairs, but a slightly different way as to how they come around and how it might advance that person's career.
Yeah, and it's absolutely. I kind of recognise that, and I don't know if I look back on the sustainability stuff. It was a kind of huge growth and personal sort of development opportunity, and I think moving out of a space where, as the one lawyer in the room, you hope that you know more about the law than everyone else, and that comes with a certain kind of gravity and authority, to moving into a space where you don't necessarily have that trump card you can play, and you're more reliant then on, the art of persuasion and stakeholder building, and you're forced to get out there and gather, I think, information and kind of build support. All really good things, and equally, it's nice to be able to influence a broader range of issues. There is something, if you're in a business, I've spent 20 plus years in business. One of the reasons you're in business, in industry, is the ability to kind of shape the way in which that business operates and have a kind of more positive impact on the world. So all good stuff. And I don't necessarily regret making those decisions and saying yes. I think what I absolutely should have done is maybe it's a kind of yes, but, or a yes, and I think again, this is where I think maybe this is a legal thing. I think, there are other functions typically that are better at, if someone says, the CEO says, I really want you to lead this particular area. I think lawyers generally, and this may just be purely about me, Scott, this might be just my failings, but I don't think lawyers are as good as some other functions at saying, okay, but we absolutely, I need the resource, I need the investment, I need this, I need that. Otherwise, not going to do it. Lawyers, because we, particularly in-house legal functions, can, if you're not careful, become a little bit of a dustbin for issues. We're sort of conditioned, I think, more to take stuff on, and we tend to say yes, and then afterwards we figure out, okay, actually this is a big deal, and this is stretching my team, beyond actually where we are now. And I think going back and trying then to reverse engineer it and acquire that kind of resource, and set yourself and your team up for success. Doing that once you're in the middle of things is much more challenging, because the business says, well, you said yes, and you're there when you're doing it yourselves, and all of a sudden you want to add more people on the cost. So I think it is related to that, whether it's kind of people pleasing or just we're a service and we give. I think my own experience would be, I've probably gone too far sometimes and stretched myself and others too thin, when probably what I should have said was either no, or I'll do it, but let's be really clear about the conditions. Because if you want this service, this is what you're going to have to invest.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that is really great practical advice, because, and I think there is a slight difference if you go out looking and taking ownership of the work versus it's landed on you in whichever way. You're on the front foot rather than on the back foot, and taking on extra responsibility is brilliant. I think for most, like, a few of the guests on the podcast have always said, like, say yes, and say yes to any opportunity. So definitely temper that with this advice that everyone's got self-interest in their career, right? So you want to say, like, how is it advancing my personal growth journey? Where's it going to take me? What opportunities might come along here as a result of this? And like, am I stretching myself too thin? Or am I being rewarded for this additional responsibility, either personally or the opportunity to grow my function or to, like, bring in another member of my team, which additional resource. So I think it's wise words.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, am I serving the best interest of the business as well? Because I think you don't, if you say yes and you're not necessarily able to completely follow through on that, then actually you're not serving, you're not serving your employer's interests either. So, but yeah, I think it's, I don't know, maybe I've got the privilege, looking back, having said yes all the way along, to sort of say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't. I talk a much better game than I've played over the years, and, I think, But yeah, so I do recognise that. I recognise that different view of the world.
That's the game of recruitment. Talking a good game. Yeah. But and have you got a framework now that you have? Do you have anything or like a map that would make you say yes or no?
Probably should have, Scott, shouldn't I? Having just twittered on about that. No, I mean, I think we've got a reasonably tight view on where we can add value and where we can't. Both looking at the resource that we've got and the expertise that we've got. And we've spent quite a bit of time over the past 2 years figuring out what we shouldn't do. It could probably be articulated better. And I think that's probably not a bad place that's pretty good advice to someone coming into a role, just to be really clear about where they're going to play and, the difference that they can make in those spaces.
Yeah. Excellent. So we'll jump on to lesson 3.
Yeah. So I know this is lessons I learned in law. I suppose this is more of a kind of lessons I learned in life, really.
Okay.
And it's become a real area of interest for me, not just sort of interest, but a real area of sort of passion for me. So I'm very old now, Scott. I don't feel very old. I feel as if I'm still in my 20s, but I'm horribly old. And I'm sort of conscious of the fact that I've spent, most of my career, decades really. And despite the fact that I'm married with 2 daughters, sort of decades really totally unaware of the sort of invisible privileges that I hold as a man, and particularly as a kind of white, straight man in business. And recently, and it really is, it's basically over the last kind of year, 18 months, I've become much more aware of that, and I suppose sort of a bit embarrassed really about the fact that I have always thought, I've had a good career. I'm enjoying a good career, and absolutely, I've put the work in, and I think I've made some kind of sensible choices along the way. But I had no real sense of the fact that I think part of the reasons for my success are down to things that I can take no responsibility for, and that are largely around things like gender. So I suppose my third lesson, I don't know, am I allowed to swear on this?
Absolutely.
Well, my third lesson, I kind of badge as sort of fuck the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And which is just a kind of, the patriarchy, by the way, is a word I would never have used until about a year ago. And there's still a little bit of me that sort of pauses before I say the word, because I don't feel hugely comfortable with it. But I've spent quite a lot of time talking to a lot of women within my sort of network, contacts, friends, people I've met, people I haven't met, and I've sort of connected with through LinkedIn about their experiences. And I've been absolutely staggered. And again, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this really, because I've had decades to do this, but I've been staggered just how different women's experiences of everyday life are to mine. And if there was one thing, if there's one thing that we sort of talk about today that I would encourage anyone, certainly sort of any man like me, and hopefully much younger people than me, to just kind of reflect on, I think is just how different our experiences are, and just make a bit of an effort to figure out what those differences are and how they impact, say, on our everyday working lives.
It's first and foremost, the patriarchy, the word, I think Sam Plant's LinkedIn is what brought it to the fore for me, along with Barbie, the movie last year. Needs a shout out with Ryan Gosling. But jokes aside, like what from like, because it's all lived experience in a certain point in life, and I'm in the same position where my wife is a working lawyer and very career driven, and see the perhaps not direct challenges, but just the issues that she deals with and will continue to deal with, that perhaps not even bias, but just the perception of the role of a mother and a female, I think are very different. And some of that is pressure she puts on herself. But what would, I'm aware of that because I'm going through it, but what would you say to yourself 15 years ago? Like, how could you support then, or be more attuned to these types of challenges or that position of privilege?
I think it's pretty simple, really. And again, sort of, cringingly simple. I mean, I just started talking to the people around me. So I think it was about 18 months or so ago, there was I don't know if you remember there was another sort of celebrity Me Too case, and this one being about Russell Brand. And there was nothing particularly special about that issue. It was every bit as sort of grim and depressing as lots of other ones. But there was a lot of focus at the time, I think, about the comedy circuit and entertainment, and lots of people talking about misogyny within that industry. And I started thinking, all right, well, it's not my industry, but presumably it's not just limited to the comedy circuit. It'll be everywhere. And why haven't I seen more of that? Why am I not more tuned into that? Because by and large, I mean, I'd seen some stuff at the beginning of my career, which was, pretty unacceptable then, let alone now. But it largely hadn't kind of touched me over all of those years. So on the back of that, I just had a conversation. I had a conversation with a few people who I knew on LinkedIn, and I talked to a few people that I've worked with over the years and other contacts. And what struck me, Scott, was it wasn't so much the kind of individual stories, although some of them were really hair-raising. It was the kind of everyday grind that pretty much every woman I talked to was experiencing. So whether that was getting to work, or it was figuring out what to wear safely because they were going to be, in the office, then they were going to go out in the evening, at work. So the strategies that people were having to devise to not be left alone with the handsy bloke who worked in finance or wherever. Pretty much every aspect of life, things that I just did not give any thought to. So, I put on a jumper, jeans and trainers pretty much every day. The different thought processes that my female colleagues had to go through around that, the amount of energy and thought which they had to put into simply navigating the day. Even if they weren't in an especially sort of grim environment, that was really shocking. It was really shocking to me, and I just found the whole idea utterly exhausting. So for me, I'm able to commit all of my energies to either work or play. And I think a lot of my sort of female peers have a whole lot of other stuff that they have to navigate. And some of that, I think, is around the point you're making about the different expectations of working mothers and the allocation of kind of domestic chores between men and women. So it's not all about the issues of sort of personal safety or sexual harassment. It's just the different expectations of women. I don't have to deal with any of that. And here I was thinking what a great career I'd had and how successful I'd been, when the reality is, the load that I've had to carry throughout my career has been so much lighter than it would have been if I'd been a woman. And so it was, for me, I just started to think about, well, okay, where would I be now, if rather than Sam, I was Samantha. And it was a pretty sobering thought, because I suspect I'd be in quite a different place, and my career would have taken a very different shape. So that's a very long answer to your question, but I think it's a good place to start, and hopefully lots of people who listen to this podcast are starting in a better place than me, and and have made a lot more effort than I made for decades. Is just talking to female friends and colleagues, and understanding, how they experience.
How do you start that conversation? Like how do you approach LinkedIn's one thing, but how would you approach a colleague and have that open dialogue and create a safe space? Like, is there any words or any like practical things that you've applied that you find work well?
Yeah, I think it certainly helps if you've already got a bit of trust and you've got a relationship. I mean, I think if it's the first thing if you're new in a job and it's the first thing you ask, a female member of your team, I suspect there'll be a certain reluctance to share that, and perhaps with good reason, and it might seem a bit kind of performative. I mean, I think start with the people who are close to you, because I think one of my learnings is that, even people that I know very well, again, I'd never really asked them, about their experiences, or, their commute, or, their sort of relationships with their bosses. And so hopefully there are lots of people out there who do have those conversations. But I would say pick someone you know and you trust, and who importantly trusts you, and just have a chat with them. And I would absolutely bet that you will be surprised with what you hear. And for me, it was one of those things that once you'd heard that, once you've seen that, you can't kind of unsee it. And then you're in a position where you either just say, well, that's really, really interesting. I feel that little bit wiser today. Thanks very much. And I'll go back to normal. Or you then build that into, your own particular approach to leadership, and your own approach just to being a human being, to be honest. If you're not really interested in the experiences of 50% of the planet, doesn't necessarily lead you to being, say, a good leader or a good colleague and friend. And I'm afraid there are a lot of people, and I was absolutely one of them, who I think show insufficient interest in the experience of half the planet.
Yeah, it's like a big empathy piece, right? And being curious about other people's experience, I think, as a whole. But I think that's a really useful starting point that people can, leaders or not, can apply. Which I think those little steps, and like normalizing having the conversation, creating the language in your team is important. It's the issue now is as live as it's ever been with everything that's going on, and the progress that's been made over the last 10 or so years does feel at a little bit of a uncertain point with stuff that's going on. And you, I think that was how initially we connected a couple of years ago. Sort of you from time to time talk about that issue, among others, on sharing photos of your dog on LinkedIn. When did you start participating in the platform and sort of sharing those views?
Yeah. Yeah, and she's the brains of the operation, Heidi. Actually, she's the inspiration for a lot of this. But no, I think it was relatively recently, really. I mean, I'd never done anything on LinkedIn. In fact, I'd never really done anything on social media. I've got a Facebook account. I don't really use it. I've got a Twitter. I should say X, but I don't feel like saying X. Yeah. I've got an X account and an Instagram account, but I tended not to put anything out there. I just kind of read stuff or looked at stuff. And so I just started, to be honest, I just started writing as much for me as anybody else. It was a kind of form of working things through, that sort of expression of, thinking in ink and putting things down in writing, so to help me process some of that stuff without sounding too psychobabble about it. And to tell you what, I mean, one thing, Scott, and I think we might have had this conversation. One thing that absolutely amazed me, again, was how few men actually do talk about this stuff on LinkedIn. And there's no obligation to do that. And, I think there are some people who probably think it is a bit kind of showy and performative to do all this stuff in public on LinkedIn. Although the reaction generally to the stuff I do has been lovely. But I am still a bit bewildered that there aren't more people, and in particular more leaders, who are vocal on this topic, because typically 50% of your workforce are women. You would expect, whether it's because male leaders are committed, believers in equality, or simply to get the best out of their workforce and to create an opportunity where half of their employees can genuinely give their best. You'd kind of expect there to be more people talking. So I think one of the surprises for me when I started posting was just how much attention they got, which was slightly intimidating to start with. Because I didn't think it would be particularly novel or interesting. And yet it did seem to kind of resonate with a lot of people. So I find the whole rollback of DEI understandable, because I think it's been done in a way that probably left too many men behind. But at the same time, I find it astonishing, really, that companies are not embracing it purely as a way of making sure that, all of their employees can contribute to the max. And we, typically companies work so hard on that piece in lots of other areas that I find it really strange that I should be, one of relatively few. There are lots of really good men out there doing stuff, but they don't seem to be as many as I would expect.
Yeah, it's I think you sort of you spoke there about the sort of the whys, why they would do it, whether they're genuinely interested or whether they see it aligned with, career benefit, and I think the latter. Like you get a lot of inauthentic. There's some inauthentic stuff around it, and I don't. I think unless there's the curiosity, which would lead you to having the one-on-one conversations and actually hearing people's experience and put you in a position where you're a little bit more informed. If you're doing it as a box ticking exercise, or it's like company led or company driven, these are our values, then it loses impact. And we see that from a recruitment perspective on DE&I. So many companies want you to pitch and talk to them about your practices as a recruitment business or a service provider in DE&I. When it comes to hiring, it's so far down the list. It's like the speed of delivery, getting a bum on a seat is like the main thing, and it loses its credibility unless it's like driven by the people in the team. So I think like having a voice on the platform, that you can be authentic and share those views is is one to embrace. But you have to have I think you have to have the interest in order for those posts to get any level of interest. Like you'll see last week, it was International Women's Day, and I'm now at the point where I just refrain from posting shit because there's so much stuff that you like celebrating. Like, does it? I don't know. It's like it's a little bit frustrating, but you just think there was a couple of posts that I read an amazing post by a managing partner in a firm. Oh god, it was Lewis Silkin's co-managing partner, and she had posted about the reality of the struggles that she's had in her career in getting to being managing partner in that firm, and the balance, and how much stuff in her life she outsources and never feeling like she's doing enough. And it was it's a post that's got a load of interest because it's real. It's a real story, and it's someone that's bearing a little bit about themselves that they wouldn't otherwise do, and you wouldn't see on there. If it's a corporate, that type of post, then it just doesn't. It doesn't ring true, and I don't think it leads to an authentic conversation either, which doesn't move things forward. I think what you're doing is great.
That's very kind of you. Yeah, and I think it sort of comes back to my F the patriarchy thing, because I think there's a lot of performative stuff out there, and you can absolutely feel the frustration, a totally understandable frustration for so many women around things like International Women's Day, when so much of it feels inauthentic and performative. I mean, I think it. I think if there were more male leaders out there, or just men generally, who were putting themselves out there and being honest and truthful about these things, that would be fantastic. I think there are lots of reasons why I think that doesn't happen, and the sort of patriarchal structures that we've got, and the fact that most boards are dominated by people who look like me. Most sort of leadership teams are dominated by people who look like me. And if they're not speaking up and advocating for, genuine equality, I mean, bloody hell, that's all we're talking about, really, isn't it? We're talking about treating different groups of people, whether that's women or men, or, people of colour and people who look like me. If they're not talking about that and talking about their own privilege, then it is absolutely no surprise to me that everyone below also won't talk about it, because the minute they start saying, well, look, some of the things I've achieved are because I'm a white guy, can be seen, however it's intended, can be seen as a criticism of their peers and their bosses.
Yeah.
And so, it's no wonder, I think, that there aren't more people. I'm still amazed that there aren't some more, but I think that's understandable. So I think the obligation on people like me and and other leaders is to kind of reflect on how we've got to where we are, and then to talk about that, and to also talk about the fact that achieving, genuine kind of equality in society, it isn't a zero-sum game. It's not a question of bringing up women and men having to make sacrifices. There are, and I could Twitter on for ages about this. There are kind of myriad benefits that men would enjoy from that kind of more equal society, whether that's, sort of greater access to different roles, or it's spending more time with your family. It's avoiding the kind of high levels of kind of burnout and suicide rate that we see particularly in men. There's a ton of benefits there, and I think if there were more leaders actually calling it out, saying, look, this will be good for the business, it'll be good for you, I'm putting my privilege on the table, and I encourage you to do the same. That's the point at which I think we'll start to see real progress. Because I think expecting women to do all the work and to be frank, it is women who are doing all the work at the moment. It is both unfair and unlikely to really get us anywhere. So it is, as you can tell, I hope, it is something I feel, I do feel really passionate about. And I think once you see that stuff, then, you're kind of obliged really to start speaking up and keep speaking up.
Yeah. And I think there's loads to discuss on it. So we'd love to continue the conversation, and perhaps it's something for a panel discussion or something that we can facilitate. And yeah, but I would say keep it up and targeting the right people and trying to engage with the with more males, I think is really important on bringing that into their awareness. So, it's great.
Well, thanks for your support as well with it. I appreciate it.
Let me know if there's anything else I can do. Perfect. Well, I'm just conscious of your time, but I'm asking for a podcast or a book recommendation that you might have for our listeners.
So, book. I should be on commission for this book because I've recommended this to so many people. There's a book called Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, who you may have come across. But yeah, brilliant book that I think explains so much about the sort of modern world and how we are being separated into our different tribes. It covers all sorts of things from sort of COVID through to Steve Bannon, through to the fact that she's been confused with Naomi Wolf, who has gone down various conspiracy rabbit holes. Fascinating book. Brilliant. Thoroughly recommend it. And podcast. I love Ian Dunt's and Dorian Linsky's origin story, which goes back to kind of explains various sort of different notions from sort of how conspiracy theories have come up through to lots of different sort of other political sort of themes. Really interesting. Good listen.
Nice. All right, I'll give it a listen. I'm on the same sort of loop at the moment of the rest is politics and all that at the moment, which is depressing, to be honest. Depressing listening. Yeah. So I need. I don't know
if that's good for your mental health.
It's not good. Yeah, exactly. It's not good. It's not even within nothing. None of it's within my control. So I don't even know. There's mornings I listen to it and I'm like, what on earth did I just listen to?
Why am I doing this?
Myself.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't give me any positive vibes. So I'll check that out. Well, listen, really appreciate the time, Sam. It's been great chatting. I know we've spoken about it for a while, but I really appreciate all that you do on sharing on LinkedIn, and encourage you to continue with it. And if there's anything we can do to promote anything around that space, then let us know. But thank you for sharing your lessons.
So that wraps up another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, powered by Harriet Brown in-house legal recruitment. Now, I share these stories each week to help lawyers of all levels, and both in private practice or working in-house. And it doesn't matter if you're early in your career or you're already leading a team. Learning from your peers or from those who have walked in your shoes before, then this is the show for you. If you find it useful, I would love it if you could share it with your colleagues or share it with your network, or drop us a message just to let us know that you're listening and that you're out there. Feedback really helps us grow the show and take it in the direction that gives the most value to you, our listeners. So until next time, I've been Scott Brown. Thank you.